Well, South Africa has had a long-standing power crisis, with load shedding being implemented almost 15 years ago. There's still not much reprieve over the years, though. Zambia has recently announced a power cut lasting for almost 12 hours a day. Uganda has decided to do away with South African power utility Eskom and nationalize the industry after widespread challenges. Zimbabwe, Nigeria and several other countries on the continent have faced power supply issues over the years. The question is the African continent going dark? And what is the impact on economies and businesses? Author of the books Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back, as well as Communications Director at the University of Limpopo, Victor Kgomoeswana, tells us more. Victor, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us on our program this morning. I mean, you know, Zambia rang in the new year with a 12-hour rotational power cut schedule. South Africa alone last year endured 157 days of load shedding. Kenya last year also noted a countrywide power outage, the first in almost 4 years. So the question is Africa going dark? What is the current status of our energy?
Well, Africa is not going dark. Good morning, Towazo.
Good morning.
Africa is not going dark. It is dark. There's a difference between going dark and being dark. We are dark purely because if you look at the hundreds of millions of people without power outage on the continent, in Nigeria it's close to 100 million. I mean, 100 million people, but a large chunk of that doesn't have access. Even here in South Africa. And remember, there's an important distinction here to be made between whether you have power supply and reliable power supply. Most of us at the moment have access to a source of power. In other words, in the houses we live, we could have, and I'm talking most as in even in the rural areas, because houses have been electrified, as in infrastructure has been provided. But whether or not when you plug into your whatever source it is, there is anything coming out is a different story altogether, which is tragic considering that we have enough renewable or cleaner energy sources on the continent to power not only Africa but the whole world. The very Zambia that you're talking about, I mean, the story here is a failure at a power station, the Kariba North Bank Power, which was just 1,000 or so megawatts, just over 1,000, and the capacity due to the problems, the water levels, has gone down to below 400 or just around 400 megawatts. And then there was another failure in the country. So that is obviously the lack of planning and poor anticipation. Because if you know your water levels, Kariba has been there for a very long time. It's an artificial creation, but it has been there for a very long time. And we know that monitoring water levels at structures like Kariba is not something that you wake up and suddenly realize the water levels are low. The heart of the problem, Towazo, is, I think, two things. One, believing that we are not worthy of good service, because even our leaders, when they talk about energy, I don't think like they talk of it as something that's essential. Would you try and drive your car without petrol in it? Would you?
No.
Here we are trying to run a country without security of power supply. When I listened to Minister Mantashe a few days ago talking to industry experts, who are the people that we keep silencing, they could tell us how to get the security going by getting the diversification. We've got solar energy we could use for lighting streets. We don't need Eskom pumping and using coal-fired power stations to just keep the street lights on. But we try and get one national grid and we power everything from there instead of decentralizing, because there are things that don't need this high current or heavy current that we talk about. To keep your street lights on, to keep your house lights on, should not be dependent on whether or not Eskom can supply. Eskom could focus on industry, allowing factories to run, but let households go off-grid as much as possible. The street lighting should go off-grid. But now we think of it as just one thing. We somehow have to think to centralize something, and yet we don't invest in knowing how it should be made to be efficient. It's a tragic thing, because the Congo River in the DRC, which has over 60 million people not having access to electricity, could power the entire continent. The Congo River alone. But now the people of the DRC themselves are not able to get this power. So I wouldn't say we are going dark. We have been dark. We are dark for a very long time, which is scandalous considering how much we could have in wind, solar, geothermal, and solar energy.
All right, so on the basis of your diagnosis, the fact that Africa is already dark, what does this mean for the continent? A continent that's trying to reposition itself, find its place amongst, the rest of the global community. When we look at the world economic order, the sort of path or the transition that's taking on, Africa is trying to find its place in all of that. How is the current state of energy crippling those efforts?
Well, it's a no-brainer. You have, and I mean, you can look at South Africa. I want to simplify it. If you go to any place where there was no electricity and suddenly there is supply, suddenly you see young people with power, vacuum cleaners on the street corners trying to wash cars, because now they can plug in and wash their cars and generate their income, which is the real problem. Without electricity, you can't supply good social services. You can't talk about artificial intelligence. We live in Gauteng. People talk about e-learning. They want to get laptops into schools. They want to get people to use cell phones to download content.
You want to create smart cities.
You want to create smart cities. All these things cannot function without electricity. You have hospitals. You have an ICU. Can you imagine just somebody losing life because we couldn't keep lights on, because we were not getting the right kind of coal, because we were... So the lack of electricity is going back to my example. You wouldn't try and start your car if you know you're running low on petrol. The same thing, you can't run an economy if you are low on energy. That's why it's called energy, not electricity. It's energy. The ability of the economy to function depends on the availability of energy. And the implications are all the plans that we have, and these are grand plans, intra-Africa trade, getting the industrialization, all these are desirable. But somehow it looks like we have the disjuncture between understanding that you can't say run faster when you are depleting me of energy source. And we want something to happen, but we fail to invest in that ingredient, the very ingredient that is the active in the participant in the economy. So I'm saying we have very good plans, but until we realize that energy is the ability to do work, that's basic primary school physical science. Energy is defined as the ability to do work. So if we don't invest in the ability of the economy to function, all those plans that we are making are fiction.
Talking about planning and, evoking the intra-African trade agreement, there's a lot of conversation around integration amongst our African leaders, almost as if there's an understanding that together, as a continent, we can do so much more, as opposed to relying on these borders that have been sketched out for us. We know that regionally, ECOWAS is talking about some sort of integration energy plan. What are your thoughts on that, especially because you've already surmised that, we're trying to move eons ahead of time when we haven't even, mastered the very basic and simple elements. What are your thoughts on those integration?
Integration is a noble idea, and when all is coordinated, things work just a lot better. Yes, the political borders of Africa don't mean much, but let's keep the politics out of it. You can't integrate dysfunctional units. So if I am running Johannesburg and I can't get power security, and that's why I keep going back to going off-grid as much as possible. We make it blasphemy to talk about moving off-grid. I'm not saying dissolve power utilities. I'm saying give them the responsibility to light up that which they can light up. To hold the nation hostage and have neighborhoods that are crime-ridden, unable to be safe because we can't keep the street lights on because Eskom has problem with coal supply, is tragic. I am saying, yes, create units. Remember, a body is made of many systems, which are made of many organs, which are made of many tissues and many cells. Sometimes you want to get the cells to be coordinated, but you are disorganizing the cells themselves. Many households don't need to be coordinated with the national grid, because if we made solar affordable for an average household, then we would be able to free up Eskom to power the industry. So I agree with integration, but you can't keep your units disorganized and dysfunctional and say if we coordinate them and integrate them, they'll work better. No. You want a system of organs, of tissues, of cells that are well functional before you can talk integration. At the moment, members of individual states should be running their shows much better, and they are not doing it. They are not giving enough priority to the energy. In fact, whenever now we are expecting a general aid statement, when I hear political leaders talk, you can tell that it doesn't look like they agree that energy is necessary to make all these grand plans that they are announcing happen. There's a disjuncture there that I don't know. Maybe something we're missing, because these are intelligent people. They're very intelligent people, but somehow they seem to believe they can talk us out of a problem. And yet I'm saying, don't expect somebody who's hungry to run. Don't expect an economy that's starved of energy to be able to function. Whether you talk integration or not is another story.
Well, not all sectors of society are placing energy on the back burner. We've seen business for the last couple of years or so inject a lot of funds, certainly into renewable energies on the African continent. Last year we saw the Green Hydrogen Summit that was officiated by government. So there is a silver lining. There is some hope on the horizon. There is some interest, certainly, in what Africa's renewable energy resources can supply. But is that enough presently? Talking about the summit, for instance, towards the end of last year, there was a lot of interest.
Yeah, we love summits, don't we? Summits are great if what you decide at the summit, you go out and do. So I love the green energy, the summit that you referred to, and I love the decisions, the recommendations that came out of it. But again, also, it's almost as if somebody's lights are off in the way they think. We go to a summit and we agree, and I'm sure at the summit people talked about, don't put everything on the national grid. That's the weakness, the inbuilt that thinking keeps baffling me. Why do we believe that everything belongs on the national grid? Because green energy is exactly that. If you have one system that is dysfunctional and you have many units that could function on their own, why do you not allow those many individual units to function? In other words, why don't we allow Soweto to say, how far can we go with solar energy? And then how do we need to top up that which solar energy cannot do to be able to use? And then we will find that certain parts of South Africa are more endowed with solar energy, some are better endowed with wind energy, others are more endowed with, and you'll be able to divide this and then create individual units that are self-reliant, because most of the individual units, just their requirements energy-wise, they could be self-reliant using the little energy, the renewable or cleaner energy resources around them. Then the coal-fired power stations would go into those the heavy industrial requirements that we have. At the moment, green is not green if you're not able to use the little that you have. And I'm saying no street light in South Africa should be dependent on the national grid, because there's enough sun in every part of this country to be able to power at least the street lights. And once we think like that, we are going to be able to see that we have enough around us, and not every problem is going to be the Kariba North Bank supply in Zambia or Eskom in South Africa. We can do enough with what we have, and then we can talk about greener energy. Big business or small business also should be allowed to provide solutions. But because we think as a country that Eskom should be paying us enough money as a government. Well, the
government is the only institution that can proffer a solution.
Yeah. But there's the thinking that we need a power utility. Yes, we do, but we don't need it to provide for everything that we have. But because of the mentality that we have a power utility that is owned by the government, and we are thinking, well, we can do, even when the utility is losing money, we refuse to allow the independent power producers to be able to supply, because we are looking at utilities as the source of revenue, even when they are not able to. They are drawing the fiscus and depleting it of all the little resources that we have. Right. I would say we seem to forget. We can't run a car without petrol. And at the moment, we don't seem to think of electricity as petrol, yet we expect the economy to run. Until we get that, we make that shift mentally, we will struggle. We will continue to talk about energy as if it's something out there. Yeah. It's the ability to do work. That's where I want to go to.
All right, well, we unfortunately have to leave it then. Yet there's so much to unpack when it comes to energy on this continent, but I think it's a conversation that we can certainly continue on another day. Thank you so much, Victor, for your time. That is author of the books Africa is Open for Business and Africa Bounces Back, as well as Communications Director at the University of Limpopo, Victor Kgomoeswana. Up next.